Angakpa Thoudok, behind the scenes of China's mysterious 1977 flying figure incident. Everything began on a bitter night in 1977, in one of China's border villages. The sky was cold, the wind shrill, and from the distant hills surrounding the village came the occasional sounds of goats. People sat quietly in their homes by their stoves. Some were mending their houses, others trying to warm their children's faces. In the late hours of the night, the sky suddenly broke with an unusual movement. First, a distant flash, then a light descending slowly, gently downwards. The first to see it were a few young men standing watch in the fields. The light's descent was slow but steady. It wasn't round like the moon, but more like the gleam of a flattened shape. The light descended as if filtering through a veil within a hazy mist, and then a shadow, now close, appeared in the sky. Was this shadow a flying object, or an indefinable trick of the light? No one could say for certain, but what sent a shiver through everyone in the village that night was the sound that emerged the moment the light touched the ground. A deep, metallic hum, soft yet vibrating at a frequency that shook everything it touched. Animals went wild, dogs barked, chickens burst from their coops. The first to reach the spot where the light had landed saw, just before dawn, through a layer of mist that had settled over the fields, the edge of an object gleaming. The object seemed to be resting on the ground. There was no smoke, no flame, no sign of an explosion around it. There was only a cold aura, as if emanating from within the metal, and strange, yet unfamiliar marks that seemed fused to the ground. Circular, interlocking rings, a trace resembling a network pattern, hard to explain beyond the scorched grass. Some recounted that the marks seemed to have seeped into the soil like ink and didn't fade for days. When they approached the object, there was a slight, razor-sharp metallic scent in the air. But alongside this smell was something even stranger, something that appeared from within the mist like a thin, almost transparent coating. A few brave youths who dared to touch it had approached without gloves. They described a cold, slight tingling sensation in their fingertips. Some said that after that touch, they were unable to speak for several minutes, and spoke of dizziness. The strangest accounts were about figures allegedly seen inside or near the object. An elderly woman from the village said she woke just before dawn, looked out her window, and saw a being standing on the ground beside the object. Her description was humanoid but not human. Its stature slightly shorter than an average person, shoulders narrow. Its skin seemed to have a silvery texture, and its facial features were not sharp, but seemed composed more of shadows. In its hands were long tools with an indeterminate number of fingers. The tools emitted a light, which expanded in rings whenever they touched the ground. The old woman said she forgot whether the being had looked at her. The only thing she remembered was that its eyes, if they were eyes, shone like small points sifted from the stars. Other witnesses said the being didn't speak, but a sound came, not words, but more like a melodic vibration echoing in the mind. This vibration was beyond human speech. It gave the listener, for a moment, both a feeling of warmth and a profound sense of foreignness. Some claimed that after hearing this vibration, they had difficulty remembering for several hours, the details of the event erased from their minds. In the days the event spread, dark corridors and whispers were born in the village. Some said the object opened a small door, and the symbols visible inside were complex figures refracting sunlight. These symbols left brief glimmers on the stones at the edge of the fields. On the stones, a few people who saw them that day said they encountered marks resembling characters from an ancient language, but these marks faded before any record could be made, or the witnesses, over time, relayed these details in different ways. Later that night, an energy field was felt around the object. In some accounts, the antenna-like protrusions around the object vibrated slightly, scattering small sparks into the air. When these sparks touched the ground, they left tiny white dots on the plants for a short while. Then these dots would burst and vanish, just like a soap bubble. The youths who saw this phenomenon thought those white dots left a bright residue on the ground by morning, but when they scoured the soil in the morning, they found neither residue nor any unusual material, as if everything that had happened that night resisted the logic of day. A group of villagers mustered their courage and decided to approach even closer to the object. As they neared, they noticed the object's surface wasn't smooth, but had a fluid texture, like liquid metal. This surface rippled the moonlight reflected upon it, distorting the surroundings briefly. A tree branch, though far away, appeared right beside the object. One witness said that for a moment, he saw himself mirrored on the object's surface, but the reflection whispered memories not his own. These whispers were filled with nameless cities, unknown melodies, and fleeting images of unfamiliar faces. While they were near the object, the sky above them suddenly opened in layers. A thin, blue-green line rose, and then a section that looked like a lid on the top of the object gently retracted inward. A ribbon of light shot out from within, streaking into the sky like a jeweler's wire being cast, turning the night into day for an instant. That light was so bright it could be seen miles beyond the village. As the light ascended, the marks on the ground quickly scattered like ash and vanished. The tips of the grass in the field instantly dried. A few animals fainted briefly and then came to. The light rose, and as it rose, the very air seemed to vibrate. A few seconds later, the remaining part of the object withdrew like a breath, and slipped away as a whole towards the sky. The moment of its departure was not filled with silence. There was a kind of tension in the environment, a held breath. People remained on their knees, some prayed, some wept. The only certainty reported from where they stood was that the object left no debris behind as it ascended. No smoke, no impact marks, just a secret steeped into the night. The next day, the marks in the field were still the talk of the village, but after the initial intense emotions, something changed. Some began to deny they had seen the event, others admitted they might have exaggerated what they saw. Yet the same question remained in everyone's mind. What were those beings? Why had they come? And why had they left so quietly? In time, this question transcended the village boundaries. Whispers spreading to nearby towns reached larger cities. People rushed to each other to remember the night. Some interpreted the reason behind the event as a supernatural warning. Others thought it was a kind of experiment, that a more advanced system might have come and gone without leaving a trace. Some felt they had been given clues to a world invisible to the naked eye. Even as people returned to their daily lives, they sometimes looked at the sky, waiting for a new light that might get lost among the stars. The name Angakpa Thoudok circulated from mouth to mouth after that night, recalled sometimes with fear, sometimes with awe. The village elders linked that night to the legends of their ancestors. The young whispered their own theories to each other. And night after night, the story of the marks encountered in the field was told to the children of neighboring villages like a fairy tale. A picture was painted of unknown doors existing in the world, and behind those doors, beings resembling humans but much older, roaming. The traces of that night remained not only in the soil but also in minds. For some, it was a warning. For others, an invitation. And every year on the anniversary of that date, windows in some village homes were kept closed, while in others, watch was kept in doorways, hoping a light might be seen again. According to whispers, on some nights a strange gleam does appear in the sky, but that gleam is never fully explained. That gleam is merely an echo of Angakpa Thoudok's unending silence. In the weeks that followed the night, the village's daily rhythm continued to be unsettled. Those working in the fields suddenly recognized a scent of soil they hadn't known before. It was said that when the morning mist settled, a chill could still be felt around footprints. In some homes, children woke up crying in the dark of night, but remembered nothing when the sun rose. Some saw recurring images in their dreams of what they had seen that night. Circular rings of light, shadows of slender-fingered hands, and a melody coming from afar but abruptly cut off. A man came from beyond the town, a former journalist with a gray face, carrying a small notebook he never parted from his bag. His arrival led to the whispers being heard more loudly. The man began staying in the village to document what they had seen. At night he would wander the village square, knock on doors, talk to the elders. Everyone would tell him what they themselves had seen and heard. What was written in the journalist's notebook sometimes sharpened the same event from different angles. The geometric arrangement of the marks, the shadows cast by the light from the object's surface, and the dizziness one witness described, caused by the thin lines seen on the object. The journalist insistently noted one detail in his notes. In the exact center of the field where the object had landed, unlike elsewhere, the soil structure, a few centimeters beneath the vegetation, was strange. He wrote that small stone fragments appeared to be arranged in a very orderly sequence, but none of the stones were found in the surrounding area. In the early morning light, these stones gleamed as if they were pieces of a regular architectural pattern. One woman claimed that on the surface of the stones was a symbol so fine it couldn't be scratched even with a fingernail, a symbol that sometimes resembled a spiral, and at other times looked like a labyrinthine bridge. One night, a shepherd walking alone in the forest near the village saw a clearing among the trees, as if a suddenly drawn curtain had been parted. The mist rising from the clearing wasn't normal. When he entered it, the air changed instantly, his breath grew heavier. The shepherd stood trembling at the forest's edge for several minutes. Afterwards, he couldn't tell anyone what he had seen, the words were knotted in his throat. The next day, the lines on his face were deeper, dark circles had formed around his eyes. Some said it was just a result of sleeplessness and fear. Others felt the emptiness within the shepherd carried the shadow of having been drawn into something. A few weeks later, several uniformed individuals were seen arriving in a military vehicle. Until they came, everyone in the village had been voicing their theories loudly. After their arrival, the streets grew quieter. The uniformed individuals entered the field, examined the marks and the soil, had brief conversations with the villagers, then placed some materials into sacks and took them away. After their arrival, gossip in the village peaked. Some claimed they were part of a local science team, others alleged they were covering up something else. But one thing was certain, the shadow falling over the marks pointed to another hand at work, as if not just nature, but a conscious observer was also selecting events. Another motif repeated in the accounts of the night: music. That night, some witnesses had heard a resonance. This resonance resembled a human voice but played with the arrangement of notes, carrying both the rhythm of a drum and the pitch of a flute. The music was etched into the mind, turning into a melody. It hypnotized listeners briefly. Some felt a happy peace when they remembered the melody, others a deep longing. A few notes of the melody were later transcribed by a musician in the region. The sound transferred to sheet music didn't match traditional melodies. The musician said his hands trembled involuntarily as he wrote the notes, and that his head ached for several days after they were written down. The seemingly nonsensical effect of this melody was also seen in the behavior of the village children. Some children developed a tendency to go out at night and look at the empty lands. They would stretch their hands towards the sky, mumbling as if talking to something unseen. According to one mother, her child said, "Come," out loud several times to itself. The only response the child gave to the mother's question was to smile and look at the sky. Such behaviors caused concern in the village. Some explained it as children's play, others thought they were responding to the call of something else. As time passed, the echo of the event reached more distant regions. New narratives about that night emerged in neighboring villages. Similar lights, similar marks, even similar melodies. These repeating motifs seemed to point beyond a singular event. Some suggested it was part of a series of visits. Another view held that nature itself was involuntarily opening and closing a door. Whatever the idea, the appearance of the same symbols in different lands lifted the event from a local occurrence and connected it to a broader pattern. One evening, a strange cloud clustering was seen in the sky. The clouds gradually rotated towards a center, forming a spiral shape, and this spiral brightened with a small core. According to a few people, the core's gleam opened like an eye and watched the entire village for a moment. The sensation in that moment was a hard-to-define excitement, a feeling of being read, of being tested. Some closed their eyes and prayed, others started kicking the ground, some were sobbing with laughter. Immediately after the eye disappeared, several children were observed vomiting on the ground simultaneously. Some children experienced slight fainting spells. At that moment, the village elders gathered and looked at each other silently. On their faces was both astonishment and the fear of an old knowledge being remembered. Meanwhile, a woman living in a small house at the farthest end of the village said she saw a light burning all night. The light hovered outside her house, touching her window frame. The woman said that the moment the light touched, she saw a kind of vision, a distant city, figures moving under transparent domes, and beings emitting light from thin lines along their bodies. The vision passed like a breath, but the feeling it left in her hands was a deep loneliness, as much as a curiosity. A while later, a gleam related to this vision formed in the woman's eyes. That gleam carried the resolve of a seeker. These new anecdotes shaping around the event made the mystery even more impenetrable. Each narrative took one small step further. Each step gave birth to more questions. Some thought it was a first contact, others a warning. Those who had seen the night could no longer look at the sky as before. Every star was a door, every shadow a potential visitor. And as the village's boundaries expanded, how Angakpa Thoudok's shadow spread into the world grew even more complex. As time advanced, the traces of Angakpa Thoudok's shadow began to appear not only in the fields but also on people's bodies and everyday objects. At first, they were small signs, tiny collapsed circles on the rim of a teapot frozen in the morning, thin lines appearing on a doorknob, then more obvious ones. Pocket watches stopping, compass needles spinning meaninglessly, lamps flickering briefly. These minor disruptions created a kind of anticipation and unease within the village people. No one could say whether they were coincidences or not. A wound that appeared on a child's arm plunged everyone into a deep silence. The wound was in the shape of a small star. Initially, no one paid it much mind, but when it scabbed over, a bright metallic essence was noticed inside. An old woman said she had seen a similar mark in her youth. That mark was connected to a forgotten story from decades ago, an ancient warning told by their ancestors. The story was about the sky opening on certain nights and those who descended from the sky never returning without changing something earthly. Those who came that night might have left a kind of covenant between themselves and the world. The covenant wasn't obligatory, but its signs remained. A group of the village's young people, caught up in the excitement, decided to record things. They took an old tape recorder and a flashlight and returned to the field. At midnight, a strange hum was recorded on the tape. It had a regular rhythm, unlike anything resembling a human voice. At intervals, it was as if someone was repeating a single word, but the word was unknown. Those who listened to the tape remembered suddenly falling asleep during the recording. When they woke from a dreamlike state, they noticed the clocks had jumped forward several hours. This lost time phenomenon recurred in many witnesses' accounts. A few minutes, a few hours, or a whole night. People sometimes forgot the same episode when recounting their experiences. A farmer found small, geometrically arranged circles that had opened at midnight among the wheat stalks in his field. The circles were irregular but carried a rhythm. Inside the stalks were thin, bright particles. The particles weren't metallic. They were more crystalline yet flexible. When crushed with a finger, they slightly changed color. The farmer, who put these particles in a jar, saw a small ring of light spinning inside the jar until morning. The air inside the jar chimed softly, like a night full of bells. At the other end of the village, unclear lines suddenly appeared on the blackboard in a teacher's classroom. According to the children, a light had entered the classroom window at midnight and drawn lines on the board. The lines on the board didn't erase until morning, and the same symbol kept appearing in the middle of the lines, 3 small dots set within a spiral. One child said they had seen a similar figure in an old book they found at home. The book was a dusty work from their grandfather's library, its writings largely faded. When asked, the grandfather's face hardened even more. He remembered something but refused to tell. One night, a man hunting alone in the forest didn't return. The next day, only half of his shoe was found at the forest's edge. The other half seemed to have disappeared deep into the forest. In the man's bag, there were strange symbols drawn on the pages of the small notebook he carried. The symbols matched the same rhythm felt previously on the stone surfaces in the fields and in the background rhythms of the tape recordings. In one corner of those notes, a small number had been jotted down by an indistinct hand, 07. This number meant nothing to anyone, but more emerged within a few months. These were only the beginning of the stories circulating in the village. When similar signs were found in neighboring villages, The feeling that these signs had a pattern grew stronger. A historian, sifting through old maps, came across several marked areas drawn centuries ago. The historical past of the marks suggested that the region's ancient inhabitants had remembered something at the same spot over the centuries and occasionally saw the same symbols. This archaeological perspective made it difficult to reduce the event to just one singular night, as if Angakpa Thoudok was an echo repeating the call of a much older ritual. In the village, the number of those watching the sky at night increased. Some, while keeping watch by a window, would suddenly freeze, their eyes locked on a specific point, their breaths flattening. In these moments, observers sometimes described people's faces changing, their ages suddenly increasing or decreasing. They felt another life passing through the gaze. This change was brief but its effect lasting. People began to look at each other with different eyes. One evening, a bell was heard from the village church's bell tower, though no one had rung it. In the few minutes following the sound, similar gleams spread over the hills outside the village. The gleams pulsed with a rhythm, and then leaves hanging from branches here and there became covered in a white dust. The dust sparkled like diamond powder in the morning sun, but couldn't be held with a finger and didn't disperse easily. Some elders remembered such bell events. For them, the bell was a kind of call. Come, look, we are here. Dreams grew even more complex. One woman described dreaming of a city. The stones were transparent, the streets deep, and every corner opened onto a door. One of those doors was looking at her in her dream. The door carried a motionless light within. When the woman woke, she found a thin, dusty ring in her hand. The ring's surface resembled the texture of the stones in the city she saw at night. Some said the ring faded after a few days, others believed it contained a meaning and kept it. This accumulation led to two separate reactions forming in the village: acceptance and escape. Some people carried on with their daily lives, continued to sow their fields, pursued their livelihoods. Others packed their belongings and left the village. Some returned after just a few weeks, some never came back. Those who left had heard similar stories in the places they went, yet they had left their own homes behind. In the eyes of those who stayed, the leavers seemed to have either courage or lost their minds. But those who stayed also secretly sought an exit, looking at the sky every night. One night, a new mark appeared on the trunk of the village's oldest tree, a deep fissure, and inside the fissure, an old piece of metal. The piece was neither entirely rustically worked nor completely smooth. Its surface was covered in a linear texture and vibrated slightly when touched. The youth who found the piece carried it to the village square. When a few people touched it, everyone simultaneously suddenly grew tired, their breaths heavy, and short, rapid images flashed before their eyes. Waves, a city silhouette, and a door. The image vanished in an instant but remained in their minds. At the end of that night, those gathered in the village square looked at each other, unable to reach any definite conclusion. The question hanging in the air seemed to grow a little more concrete each night. Was Angakpa Thoudok just a visit, or was it a call? And if it was a call, who was calling? The clocks on everyone's wrists seemed stuck at 3:17. Some clocks had stopped, some had wound backwards, some were stuck in meaningless minutes. That number for some marked a moment on the edge of sleep, for others, a sign of something approaching. And one night, the silence broke. A hum coming from afar, first a faint vibration, then turning into a resonance that shook the whole village. People rushed to their windows. The sky was split by a brighter line than ever before, and that line expanded as if a lid were opening. Some prayed, others just watched. In that moment, the boundary of waiting seemed to have been crossed. What was to come was uncertain, and so was the return. When night came again, the village's breath was more constricted. The moon was in a timid wait behind the clouds. People had withdrawn to their windows, trying to listen to life's normal rhythm in the door cracks. But that old vibration rising from the fields had enveloped the surroundings. That vibration was no longer just a sound, it was like the rhythm of a call, like the echo of a drum coming from deep within, from the center of the chest. That evening, those gathered by the old stove in the square looked at each other and walked out silently. On the elders' faces was fear, But within the fear was also curiosity, a hesitation. The youths, however, carried an excitement mixed with tension. Some went out with flashlights in hand, some with small tools they had freshly stored. Among them was Lien, a young man who made his living in the fields, had briefly lived in the city but chosen to return to his village. Lien had rehearsed every detail told about that night in his mind. The arrangement of the stones, a few notes of the melody, the circles appearing on the children's hands. His face held a determination. Perhaps he wanted to see. Perhaps to find an answer. When they reached the field, the air had a different taste. The smell of the soil had become salty. The tips of the grass had taken on a metallic sheen. There, close to midnight, the sky split again. This time the light was closer, more intense, as if a hand were leaning right over the village. The light scattered like a net, descended to the ground, and when it met the earth, it left new marks. These marks were different from the previous geometric motifs, interlocking triangles, rings resembling the nodes of a net. The rings were filled with lightly vibrating shadows. The shadows seemed to rise from within the marks in small particles. When Lien stepped on one of the marks, a shivering vibration passed through his body. An image appeared before his eyes, a distant city and indefinable figures walking its streets. The image vanished in an instant, but it left a mark, on Lien's hands, a small trace glowing faintly on his fingertips. The mark wasn't metallic, it was more like a faint remaining echo of the light. Lien took a deep breath. His heart was beating at a high rhythm, but he also felt a strange stillness, as if a moment of resolution, a door had been cracked open. Meanwhile, something moved in the air. Small, glowing objects, spinning in an orderly fashion, like fireflies. The objects gradually traced a form. The form resembled a silhouette akin to a human body, but its proportions were different, measured by another world. It had a long neck, slender arms, and its movements were like the waves of an aquatic being. The silhouette drifted down from the sky, approaching the ground, but paused for a moment before touching down. In that moment, all anyone heard was silence. The silence was as intense and sharp as a multitude of words suddenly falling silent. Then, one of the oldest women, Amma, spoke in a trembling voice. Her voice merged with the wind, turning into a chilling tune. Amma, while fixing her eyes on the sky, murmured a line from a lullaby she had kept for years. The lullaby was a sequence of words from her ancestors. The words carried rhythm more than meaning. That murmur created an unexpected effect. The silhouette slowly withdrew and raised its hands, slightly, as if in greeting. That greeting was like the stirring of a bridge centuries old. For just a moment, a few others ventured forward. Their footsteps, the sound of their feet, blended into the field's silence. A young man near Lien suddenly fell to his knees, his eyes empty, his mouth slightly agape. A few people following him found a small stone in the young man's hands. The stone's surface had the same triangular motifs seen in the sky. When the young man came to, he said he remembered nothing. He recounted that a portion of time was empty, that a few hours had vanished. The most disturbing thing witnessed that night was the disappearances. According to a few who had been in the square, a call had risen from within the light. Some voices had spoken names. Names that felt familiar, like the name of a family member. The names were not just heard, but were like an inner pull. The call awakened humanity's oldest desires. Some merely turned their heads and walked. After a short step, some were no longer among them. Some returned quietly a few days later. Those who returned had no weight of years in their eyes, but they carried a sense of absence, as if some parts had gone. One woman who returned said she had seen, at the bottom of the old well in the village one night, a door behind the stones, and an arm reaching out towards her from inside the door. The woman had knelt and looked at the door. A light had stretched towards her but then withdrawn. That night, the woman had forgotten neither herself nor the door. Some were completely changed after that night. An old carpenter could no longer use the tools he took in his hand as before. His hands acted almost automatically. A child would wake at midnight, go outside, look at the sky and murmur a melody. The melody had no words, just a resonance. Those who heard this resonance felt as if they remembered something in the language of several past generations, as if the letters of an ancient language were hidden within the melody. A few of the village's elders interpreted these events as a test. According to them, the sky had looked upon humanity, opened a door, and called some by testing them. The criterion of the test was unknown. Was it courage, compassion, or a kind of inner harmony? Some youths rejected this. For them, what had happened was a phenomenon, a natural event that needed explaining. Tensions began among them. While some believed answers lay behind the doors, others thought it was a trap meant to divide the villagers. One morning, new marks were found near an old hut outside the village. The marks had occurred during the night and hadn't faded by morning. In the middle of the marks was an object resembling a button torn from a child's toy doll. A woman who touched the object saw, for a moment, a scene from the past, a path she had run along in her own childhood. This image was both sweet and bitter, the image of a remembered loss. The object warmed slightly when held, then cooled. The village's wisest man took the object, covered it, and looked for a box to store it with the night watchman. As the nights passed, a kind of ritual was born over the village. People helped each other and gathered more frequently. Those keeping watch at night increased. The elders sang the songs they knew. These songs were, on one hand, a defense against fear. On the other, a response to an invitation coming with the tides. Some thought there was a civilization behind the doors, that they didn't just come and go, but left marks and departed. This thought refilled the village with an old belief. The world had many doors they knew nothing of. And then one night, a sign appeared in the sky, an unusual brightness around a distant star, forming interlocking rings after a while. The rings vanished one by one, but they left a shape on the ground where they had marked, a sign. The sign coincided with a point previously marked on the village's old map. That point was a place recorded years ago as a forgotten molehill. On the night the sign was seen, a few more people ventured to walk in that direction. When they went, they found a lightly vibrating void underground. Inside the void was the entrance to a long corridor, the corridor paved with stones, and on its walls were very ancient symbols. Symbols no one remembered seeing before. Where the corridor led, no one knew, but the weight of the corridor was felt like a heaviness on people's shoulders. Lien, looking at the corridor, put his hand in his pocket and felt the small luminous trace he had taken from that night. The light vibrated faintly in his pocket. Lien took a deep breath. The corridor's darkness whispered many things to his eyes. Distant seas, glass domes, figures without faces but with eyes. No one advanced at the corridor's entrance. Some turned back. Others carried the weight of having cracked open the door to something. That night, no definitive answer was found for the village. There was only one reality. The world was no longer as it had been. People had to make a choice before learning what lay behind the event: to wait, to leave, or to take a step inside, towards the unknown. No one made the decision easily. The weight of the decision remained on their shoulders, just like the chill of that night. And the sky, once again, maintained its silence, shining as a secret veiled with stars. The village's nights were no longer as before. The stars were in the same place, but the sky trembled like an intermittent curtain, sometimes tearing and seeping with another light. People's sleep was interrupted, dreams blended into the day, even the ordinary tasks of daytime paused for a moment. Perhaps the most lasting mark Angakpa Thoudok left behind was that it had changed people's view of the world, along with a curiosity expanding towards the sky, a deep reticence. Months later, the small devices placed around the village, portable compasses, old radio parts, and rods placed in glass jars, still carried faint vibrations inside some of them. Lien, who gathered these devices and arranged them in a strange order, took them all to the center of the field one night. The devices, when brought together, first produced a low hum, then vibrated corresponding to a note. The vibrations responded with a series of small light bursts. The length and sequence of the lights were like a language familiar to a few ears, yet completely foreign to others. Lien believed there was a logic behind this language. He pursued that logic. Meanwhile, in another part of the village, an oily dream circulated in Amma's house. Amma, in her dream, felt as if a small hand was stroking her face. When she woke and looked out the window, a figure stood outside, a tall, slender shadow, surrounded by lights seeping from its body. Amma blinked and looked again. The figure was still there but seemed to have drawn closer. This time the figure gave a greeting and let a distant melody fall from its lips. It was like a lullaby, but hidden within it were numbers, signs, and old words. As Amma listened to the melody, she seemed to remember a knowledge from years past. What she remembered was, for her, both a warning and an invitation. Some of the village's inhabitants decided to pursue the unexplainable. A group of people came to the mouth of the corridor at midnight. In their hands were old lamps, on their faces a mixture of fear and determination. The corridor's darkness felt to them like a heavy, pressed breath. A wind came from within. The wind warmed the stones, long-forgotten symbols flickered on the walls. Some of those who entered wanted to stop and turned back after a few steps. Others deepened their steps, searching for a glimmer of light within the darkness. The only sound coming from inside that night was the gentle chiming of a chain of small bells. The chain kept a rhythm as if someone were turning keys. For some, the boundary was an uncrossable line. A mother who had lost one of her children stood at the corridor's entrance and prayed on her knees. Days passed after a few people entered, and those who returned had the shadow of another season on their faces. One of the returnees, his eyes distant, his hands constantly drawing something. A sketch of the rings he had seen in the sky, of the symbols on the walls. Every symbol he drew somehow overlapped with the marks on the village's old map. On an autumn day, the sky stopped unexpectedly. The clouds slowly fell into an order, gathered in a center, and from that center stretched a thin, silvery bridge. The bridge vibrated through the mid-air. The wind passing beneath it took a note from it. The villagers gathered and looked at the sky. At the end of the bridge, a structure no one had ever fully seen before appeared. Semi-transparent, composed of domes, a shape as intricate as the branches of a tree. That structure refracted the light. The refracted light left new symbols on the ground. These symbols carried an order that no one had previously understood, yet felt familiar to some, like a memory from the past. One night, at the most unexpected moment, a figure crossed the bridge. This figure was neither entirely human nor merely light. It had an aura that left small waves in its wake as it walked. The figure's movement resembled the rhythm of the old lullabies told by the village elders. As it walked, the figure spoke a few words. The words were unintelligible, but everyone who heard them felt certain feelings reflected within themselves. Sorrow, call, curiosity. The figure advanced. A small child ran uncontrollably and touched the spot where the figure had passed. An energetic spark came from the child's hand and the child's eyes suddenly shone. In that moment, everyone felt that a door standing on the boundary of consciousness had been cracked open. However, a clear image of what lay behind the doors never emerged. Some returns came with a vague sense of harmony. Others were incomplete and halved. The stories told by those who returned often didn't mutually match. One would say they were by the seashore, while another described a city of glass. Some returned speaking a foreign language, others would just stare long without saying a word. This difference created a new belief system in the village. The belief that reality had multiple layers. People continued their daily tasks while simultaneously carrying the shadows of another world. Years passed. New generations grew up in the village. Some grew up hearing about Angakpa Thoudok's night only as a legend. Others inherited a real experience. The village's oldest dwindled, but the story revived among the youth. The new generations told the story in different languages, different rhythms. Some turned the tale into a song, some drew maps. Lien was now a man with graying hair. Amma looked with a calmer, deeper wisdom. Both knew that there was a mark on the village's lands, a mark belonging neither entirely to this world nor entirely to the other. In the end, the mystery of Angakpa Thoudok became part of village life without ever being fully resolved. The existence of the doors was accepted. What mattered was not when the doors would open, but how people lived with them. On some nights, a small gleam appears in the sky. Some ignore them, others again run to their windows and wait. Among those waiting, an old prayer is murmured. Let them come, so they may know what they want. Whether this prayer is a challenge, a plea, or a heartfelt acceptance, is unknown. The true face of Angakpa Thoudok may never be fully revealed. It will continue to live in the lines of the fields, on the surfaces of stones, on the edges of dreams, like a song, like a call. And on a night, if the moon rises elsewhere or the wind blows from an unexpected direction, that door may crack open again. The task remaining for everyone is not just to look, but also to listen, to remember, and to look at the sky once more with courage.